Masechet Ketubot, Daf Sadi He. We begin a Mishnah with a fascinating paradoxical case. Mi shaya nasui shete nashim. We went in this perek from 2 to 3 to 4 women, but now we're back to simply 2. Umachad et sadehu. While he's married to these 2 women, he sells a field that both women have a lien on that field to pay their ketubah eventually. Vechatba rishona lalokeach din udevarim en li imecha. The first woman, the one who we married first, writes to the buyer of that field, I will have no legal dealings with you. In other words, when it comes time for me to collect my ketubah, I'm not going to collect it from the land that you bought. The first woman writes that. The second woman makes no such deal. Why? I don't know. The first woman maybe is friends with that person, says, I'm not going to take you to court. Okay, so now eventually either they'll get divorced or the man dies, and now the ketubot have to be paid. He doesn't have enough free land in his estate, so they have to go after the collected, the one that was sold. So Hashiniya Motzi'ah Malokech, the first wife cannot take it. She made that deal, but the second wife made no such deal. So the second wife goes ahead and repossesses the land from the buyer. But then, Varishona min hasheniya, the first wife goes to the second wife and says, I got married first, therefore my lien on the land precedes yours. And the first wife repossesses it from the second wife. Although the first wife guaranteed the buyer, she would not bring the buyer to court to repossess. But now, it's not in the hands of the buyer anymore, it's in the hands of the second wife. And the first wife has every right to sue the second wife and repossess that land. So now it's in the hands of the first wife. But the buyer can go to the first wife and say, hey, you agreed that you're not going to take my land, and so I am out this land that I bought, I'm going to repossess it from you, and he repossesses it. And then it keeps going around, because once it's in that state, once again, the second wife has a right to repossess from the buyer, and she does that, then the first wife from the second wife, and then the buyer from the first wife, and you can do this forever. Each one will go to court until they spend their entire savings on legal fees. So what do they have to do? They have to make some kind of compromise. So each of the 3 parties has a legal right to repossess the land from each other. So they're perfectly within their right to keep doing that. But it's a kind of prisoner's dilemma. If they do that, then nobody will have access to be able to use the land. Nobody's going to work on the land, because then it get taken away at any point. So really, they should get together, and at least 2 of the 3 should compromise. Even if only 2 compromise, that will stop the cycle. And so that way they could split the difference however they want to compromise, and they'll agree not to take it from each other, and so they have to solve it that way. Good. We can create a similar paradoxical scenario regarding a creditor or a woman who is a creditor. The end of this Gemara will explain this case. All right, that's the Mishnah. This with this daf, by the way, we are going to complete the 10th perek. So at the very end of the perek, and this last Mishnah, we will explain the last line. All right, now we ask, so what if the first wife told or wrote to the buyer that I will not have any legal dealings with you, I'm not going to collect it? Even if she says that, is that binding? We learned that it's not binding. We learned this b'raita already, that if you have 2 partners in a field, and let's say there's something going wrong in the field, there's some problem that has to be dealt with, one of the partners says, listen, I don't want to deal with this problem, so you know what? I have no dealings with you regarding this field. I have no dealings with the field. I am removing my hand from it. Even if he says that, it's as if he said nothing, because he's still a partner, and therefore he's going to be responsible for all the rights and obligations and responsibilities, good or bad, of that field, because he's still a partner. So therefore, this woman also, she is a partner in the field, in the sense that she has a lien on the husband's field, and so therefore she's a partner. And so even if she says, I have no dealings with you regarding this field, to the buyer, it's meaningless. So the answer is must be where they do a physical transaction, like they do a kinyan sudar. They exchange a handkerchief, and just like the partners, one partner can actually do that. If he wants to fully relinquish his possession of the field and say it's all yours, that he can do, and then he won't be responsible to take care of the problem. But he can't just say, I'm not dealing with it. So we're dealing here with a case in our Mishnah where the woman actually makes a physical kinyan that effectuates her releasing her right to collect the land from the buyer. Okay, now we ask, yeah, but even if she does such a transaction, that concretizes that she's giving up that right, still, does she really mean it? Is it really effective? She could come after and claim, I just wanted to make my husband happy. I didn't really want to do it. See, he had some land. He wanted to sell it. Because whatever reason, he has good for his for business. But he knows that I have a lien on it. Now, the buyer is not going to want to buy it if the buyer knows that the wife has a lien on it and may, at any point, whenever the ketubot has to be paid, may come and take it. So the husband says, please, honey, do me a favor. Don't you love me? Give up your right to the land. So she doesn't want to be in a fight with her husband. So she gives in to the pressure and says, okay, right? But she doesn't really mean it because it's really not in her financial best interest. So she can come after and say, I didn't mean it, and therefore I can still collect. Milo Tenan, after all, we have a Mishnah in Gitin that shows this is in fact the case. Lakach min ha'ish v'chazav lakach min ha'isha mikacho batel. If a buyer buys land from a husband, and then he goes to the wife also and gets her agreement to it. Doesn't mean you have to pay twice, right? He means he gets both of their agreements to buy it, even if he does that, and the wife afterwards says, I didn't really mean it. I never wanted that land to be sold. The sale is void. So you see, so we see from the Mishnah in Gitin that a woman does have a right to say the giving up of my right was not sincere, and therefore she can go back and collect the land. And so we have a contradiction, because in our Mishnah up here, it says that the wife who told the buyer that the first wife here, who told the buyer, I'm not going to collect the land. She cannot collect the land from that first buyer, right? Her word is binding. Whereas in the Mishnah in Gitin, it says that if a wife said, I'm not going to collect the land from you, her word is not binding and she can still collect it. So how do we reconcile the Mishnah here in Ketubot and the Mishnah in Gitin? We're going to see 3 different answers to this. Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Rav Chisda, La Kashya, Ha Rabbi Meir, Ha Rabbi Yehuda. Rav Chisda says, actually, these 2 Mishnayot, although they're both anonymous, represent 2 different opinions. Our Mishnah that says that her word is binding, she cannot collect, is the opinion of Rabbi Meir, and the Mishnah in Gitin that says her word is not binding, she can always go back and collect it, is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, which we see in the following Baraita, Detanya. Katav larishon velo hatma lo, lasheni vehatma lo, ibeda ketubata. This is a little bit more of a complicated case. A man is selling 2 of his fields. Now, when it came around to the first one, the husband asked the wife, "Hey, listen, can you sign on the document showing that you agree to the sale?" She says, "No, I don't agree to the sale. I don't want to be sold. I'm not signing." Then sometime later, the husband sells a second piece of land to someone, and this time he says, "Can you sign on this one?" She says, "Yes, I will agree on the sale," by saying that she means she will not. She gives up her right to go and collect from it. If she does sign the second, then she loses her right for her ketubah totally. She cannot collect from the second because she signed on that sale saying, I'm not going to collect. She also cannot go back to the first buyer. The reason is because the first buyer can make a counterclaim. Listen, when I bought the field, I saw that there was a field there in the husband's possession. That's why I bought the field, knowing that when the ketubah has to be paid, it'll be paid from the field that's already there. So therefore, my purchase is first, and if you want to collect your land, go and take the second piece of land. Go take the second piece, right? That sale was second, and so the land was still around. Therefore, go and take that one. You can't bother me. So the first buyer does have a right to get out of it, and therefore she's stuck because she agreed not to take the second piece of land, and she can't go back to the first because the first can say, go take the second. You have a prior right on that. She loses her ketubah according to the Bimeir. You see, according to the Bimeir, when she gives up the right, the giving up the right is binding. She cannot go back. And so that would explain our Mishnah in Ketubot. Rabbi Yehuda omer, Yecholai shetomar nachat ruach hasiti la'ba'ali, atem malachem alai. Whereas according to Rabbi Yehuda, in the same, very same case, she can go to the second guy, even though she signed the sale, she can say, my husband pressured me, so I wanted shalom bayit, so fine, I signed it, and I said I won't collect it. But I didn't mean it, and therefore I have a right to collect it, and therefore she can go and collect it from the second guy, and if for whatever reason that doesn't work, she can go and, she can collect it from the second guy, so that should be enough. So the Biudah says that if she gives up her right, then then it's not binding, and so that would be the opinion of the Mishnah in Gitin. Okay, very good. So we have an answer. The problem is v'Rabbi satam la hacha b'Rabbi Meir v'satam la hatam k'Rabbi Yehuda. Doesn't make sense that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the compiler of the Mishnah, would he make an anonymous opinion? We do know that his methodology was to take a baraita, Tosefta, some earlier source that has a name on it. It's a minority opinion. And Rabbi Yehuda Nasi would make it anonymous, not because he didn't like the person, but actually as a compliment to say, I'm making it anonymous to show that is the halacha, right? I want to present that as the majority opinion. Now, with Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, make one Stam Mishnah like Rabbi Meir, the one here in Ketubot, and the other one in Masechet Gitin like Rabbi Yehuda. Now we have a contradiction. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, why would you put two Mishnayot that are based on two opposite principles, two opposing opinions within the Mishnah, both anonymous? So this is not a satisfying answer. So second answer. Amar Papa Bigrusha v'dibrei hakol. Oh, we're talking in the Mishnah here in Masechet Ketubot. We're talking about the woman. She said, I'm not going to collect that land. She wrote that as a divorcee. She had been divorced from her husband, and so even though she's divorced, she still has a lien on the land because she didn't get the ketubah payment yet. At that point, she told the purchaser, listen, I'm not going to collect the land. And now, obviously here, she's not saying that to get goodwill with her husband, because they're not even married anymore. They probably hate each other. And so therefore, if she says, I'm giving up my right to collect, that is binding. That's why the Mishnah in Ketubot is binding, because they are already divorced. Whereas the Mishnah in Gitin is where they are still married. And so there, she was pressured for her husband for goodwill, and therefore it's not binding. Third answer, Rav Ashi Amar, Kula Rabbi Meir. It could be that both Mishnayot are the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who said that if you give up your right, it is binding, right? That's what he said. It is in fact binding, and so she gives up her right. But V'ad kan lo kama Rabbi Meir hatam. But Rabbi Meir only said that in that baraita, ela b'shte lakochot, where there were two buyers. The reason is, Tamri la ita tenachat ruach abad lekama iba elach leme'ebad. Ava belokech echad afilu dibre Rabbi Meir modeh. But Rabbi Meir only said his law that she loses the right of ketuvah. There, in that case, where she didn't sign the first sale and she did sign the second sale, because if it were true that she wanted to have good relations with her husband and she didn't mean it, then she should have signed the first one also and said, I agree to the first sale also. So from the fact that she did not do an act of goodwill for the first sale, but she did sign over the second one, shows that she's sincere about her giving up the right? Because if it was really about the husband's pressure, he would have pressured her for the first one as well. So it's only in that case where there are two buyers and there's a contrast between them, and one she agrees to the sale and one she doesn't agree to the sale, that shows that she is really sincere. She wanted to give up the right, so there she cannot renege and get it back. But the Mishnah, our Mishnah in Masechet Ketubot, Matitin, Dekaptav le'acher, is where the husband previously had sold another piece of land. The Mishnah didn't bother telling us about the background of the story; it wasn't important. And she did not agree to that to the sale. She said no. So that shows that she's confident and she's not going to do something just because he pressured her. And then in the next case, when he came in and sold another piece of land, that's when the first wife said, oh, you know what? I'm not going to collect it from you. The fact that now she agrees to it shows that she is sincere. And that's why in the case of the Mishnah in Ketubot, she cannot take it back. She had already sold a previous piece, and it is, in fact, the opinion of Rabbi Meir. The Mishnah in Gitin, on the other hand, is talking about a simple case where there was only one sale. And so when she said, I'm not going to collect it from you, she is not, she may have been lying, because she may have been doing it only to gain goodwill with her husband. And therefore, Rabbi Meir would agree that she can renege and then go ahead and recollect it. So according to this, both Mishnahot can be Rabbi Meir, and the Mishnah in Ketubot happens to be the same case as the one in the Braita, where there's two sales, and the contrast between the two sales shows that she is sincere than when she gave it away and she cannot renege on it. All right, that's the end of the first section. Now we're going to quote yet another Mishnah in Gitin. Tenanatam en nifra'in min nechasim meshubadim b'makom sheyesh nechasim b'nei horin v'afilu hen ziburit. A woman who wants to collect her ketubah or a debt, anyone who wants to collect a debt, cannot collect from land that had a lien and was already sold if there is land available, right? If the husband or the borrower has land there, then you keep the collector cannot go to the land that was already sold, even if there is a lien on it. And this is true even if the property that is currently in the borrower's hands is of inferior quality. Usually, a creditor can collect from medium quality. And let's say the one that was sold already was of medium quality, but nevertheless, the collector cannot go and say, I want the medium quality that was sold and has a lien on it. He has to take whatever is currently available if something is available. Fine, that's the Mishnah. Now, question. Ibay lehu. Ishtaduf b'nei hore mahu delitrof mimisha'bedeh. What if, there is a piece of a field in the hands of, we'll call it the husband, or it could be a borrower also, and the hands of the husband, there is a field there, but the field became blighted, it became flooded or destroyed in whatever way. It's not usable. So do you say, well, it is a field there, and therefore the wife come and take that field, right? It's your bad luck that the field that was meant to pay you is no longer usable. But since the field does exist, you don't have a right to go and repossess the lien property that was already sold. Or do we say, since this is unusable and not worth anything, therefore it's as if it doesn't exist, and she can go and collect from the land that was sold? That's the question. We'll try to answer it. Tashema. Katav larishon velo hatma lo, lasheni v'hatma lo, ibeda ketubata divrei Rabbi Meir. This is why we're bringing it in, because we just quoted this baraita, so we can try to answer the question from this baraita. That said, once again, if a man sold two properties, and the first one, he could not convince his wife to countersign, and so she says, I don't agree to that sale. But the second time, she does agree to the sale. She loses out on both ketubot. She cannot pay anything. Shows that she is sincere, because this one she agreed to, and she can't even collect from the first guy, because the first guy can come and say, don't bother me. There was land there that he had in possession when I bought my land, so you go take that one. Now, if you would answer the question up here in the positive and say, yes, that if land is destroyed, then she can go collect from the sold land. Well, then we would apply the same principle in this case. If you think that she can collect the land that was sold because the land in the husband's possession is destroyed, well, then the same would be true. In this case, the woman could go to the first husband, to the first buyer, and say, listen, I want to repossess your field. And when he says, oh, but there's a field that was available when I bought it, she can say back, yeah, but that field is unavailable because I agreed not to collect from it. So her agreement not to collect from it is equal to it being destroyed, right? The same thing. In both cases, she has no access to it. It's not worth anything to her. She cannot use it to collect her ketuvah. And so if you would say that she can collect from the repossess when the field is just destroyed, then here also she would say, yes, true that she cannot collect from the second because she agreed, but let her go and collect from the first, because it's as if the second one doesn't exist. And yet Rabbi Meir does not say that. Rabbi Meir says you lost your entire ketubah, and the first buyer can say, even though you have no access to the second, it was available. There is land physically that present, and even though you can't collect it, that's not my problem. And so to here, the buyer could say, even though your land is destroyed, sorry, that's your problem. I don't have to give up my land because your land is destroyed. It exists. You have to take that and leave me alone. Okay, so this is an attempted proof to say that she cannot collect land that was sold if any land exists. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, my ibeda mesheni. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says a revolutionary interpretation of this baraita. When Rabbi Meir says she loses her ketubah, doesn't mean she loses it altogether. It only means she loses the right to collect from the second buyer. But maybe she can go back to the first buyer and collect it because the second one's not available. And therefore, too, here, when the piece of land in the husband's possession is destroyed, she can go to the buyer and say, that one's not usable, give me your land. So that's what he wants to answer. But Rava goes back and defends the opinion that says no, for two reasons. You're reading that ibeda in this baraita means she only loses the right to collect from the second. That's not what the language means. Loses her ketubah means loses it altogether from both. She cannot collect. Furthermore, he'll prove that the principle of Rav Nachman wants to say is not true. ועוד, תניא, לווה מן האחד ומכר נכסיו לשניים, וכתב בעל חוב ללוקח, דין ודברים אין לי עמך. A certain person borrowed, let's say $100 from one, and he sold his fields. He has two fields worth 50 each, he sells it to two different people. And the creditor writes to the second buyer, I am not going to collect your land, to the second buyer. En lo ala lokech rishon kelum. In that case, if the borrower doesn't have cash to pay the creditor cannot go collect from the first buyer. Because the first buyer who bought first, he can say, when I bought, there was land available that was still in the possession of the borrower. So go and take that one. Leave me out of this, right? Go take that one first. And therefore, let's say both lands were worth 100. So they, go take that and fulfill your entire loan. You cannot go take from me. And what we see in this case is that he does not, the Bisparaita does not say that the creditor can say, oh, but I already agreed that I have no access to that. So it doesn't exist, and therefore I can collect from you. No, you cannot do it. And therefore Rava goes back and supports the opinion, the conclusion that no, you cannot collect from land that you cannot collect from the first buyer, even if you agreed not to collect from the second buyer, and so too you cannot collect from sold land, even if the land that's available is destroyed. All right, but the last line is Hatam ihu dafsid nafshe biyadayim. In fact, there is no proof from this baraita to our original question, because in this baraita, it's the person, the man, whoever wrote that I'm not going to collect, they did something actively that caused a loss to themselves. She said, I won't collect from the second one. Once she said, I'm not going to collect from the second one, she loses the right to collect from the second. She brought it upon herself. The first guy's like, what, well, because you two colluded, you're going to take my field? No, I don't agree to that. So there she has no right, she loses her ketubah. But that's not the same as our original question, which was when one piece of land is sold by the husband. The land that he has in possession is destroyed. That's not her fault. She didn't do anything to destroy it. She's out her ketubah. This is not fair. And there, in that case, maybe she can very well go to the buyer and collect it. So in fact, there's no proof from this baraita. אמר לרב ימד לרב אשה, והמעשים בכל יום דהו גברא דמשכן לפרדסה לחברה ל10 שנים, וקש ל5 שנים, ועתה לקמאהו דרבנן, וכתבו לטרפה. So Rav Yemad asks Rav Ashe, hold on, that we have daily cases like this, where if something destroyed, but nevertheless they can go back to the buyer and take the field. Here's an example. There was one guy who mortgaged his orchard to someone for 10 years. In other words, he took a loan and he said, listen, you can use my orchard, take all the produce for 10 years, and that will pay off the loan, and then I'll get the orchard back and we'll be even. The problem is, after 5 years, the orchard was old, was not producing fruit anymore. So the case came before the rabbis, and the rabbis wrote for that mortgage holder, the lien holder, the creditor who also had a lien on the guy's other properties. The rabbis wrote authorization to repossess lien property that he had otherwise already sold. So that proves that there's land that he has right there. He currently owns it, but it's not productive. So yes, you can go and collect from sold property if the current property is destroyed. So it's a simple. We always do this. Therefore, the answer should be obvious that yes, you can go and collect. But we answer, Hatam name inhu dafsidu anafshaihu. Kevan davu yadeh de pardesa abidekish lai balehu lemizban. No, there, the buyers also, they brought it upon themselves. It was somewhat their fault, because they see this field that the one selling them this field, he owns an orchard, and the orchard is mortgaged out to someone else, to a creditor who has a lien on all of his property, including this land that he's buying now. And everyone knows that orchards, they tend to age and they can go bad, and therefore they accepted the risk. When that buyer bought that other piece of land, he accepted the risk that the orchard may go bad, and then he'll be able to take it. So that's why in this case he can go after that land. This case that you were talking about, that's why he can go after the land. But in general, if it's something that is just an act of nature, so all of a sudden there's a hurricane that destroys it, and the buyer had no reason to think that would happen, then that question is still left open. line. At the bottom line, Hilcheta ishtaduf benechori tarfa mishabedeh. Nevertheless, halacha is that if the unsold property that's still in the hands of the husband becomes destroyed, then the creditor, in this case we'll say the wife, can repossess that whatever was sold to the third party, and it's as if it doesn't exist. That's the bottom line. All right. Amar Abaye, nechasai lich v'acharaich liploni ve'amda v'niset. Baal lokeach haveh ve'en la'acharaich bimkom baal kelum. Abaye taught the following halacha. If a man goes to an unmarried woman and he says, I'm gifting you this field, and you can use it for your whole life. After you die, I want it to go to a second beneficiary. Okay, so that normally will happen. But let's say in the meantime, she receives the field and then she got married. In that case, Baal lokeach haveh ve'en la'acharech bimkom Baal kilum. In that case, the husband is considered like a buyer, and just as if when she owns it, when she's alive, she is the full owner, and therefore she can sell it, and the sale is final. That second beneficiary cannot come back and take it. And so to the husband is like a partner. And just like a woman cannot sell something without her husband's agreement because they're partners in that field, so too, once she marries, the husband is like a buyer. And even after the wife dies and the husband still owns it, that Ploni guy does not get it. That's Abaye's halacha, that you can make this kind of conditional sale. A will get it and then B will get it, but while A has it, if A transfers it to another person or gets married, then the B never gets it. That's Abaye's law. We ask, Kiman, Ki Haitana, who does Abaye follow? Abaye is going to follow Rashbag in the following Beraita. The Tanya, Nechasai lich v'acharecha liploni. The same thing. Someone says, here, I give you this land, and after you die, I want it to go to Mr. B. Yarad harishon umachar. If the first recipient, A, sells it, Hasheni mosi miyad halakochot B. The B, after A dies, B can go to the buyer and repossess it. So according to the B, it is repossessed. That's not the opinion of Abaye. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer en lasheni elama sheshiyeh rishon. Says no, the second recipient Piloni cannot take anything from the buyer. If there's anything still left behind in A's property, they can take that. But sorry, when it's A's, the A has a right to fully sell it and cannot get it back. B cannot get it back. And that would be the same as the husband, who is just like a buyer. Okay. Now we ask, did Abaye really say this? We have, Abaye said another thing. Ezehu Rasha Arum. Rasha says, what does it mean? Abaye said, what does it mean? A wicked person who is smart, wily. Uses a legal trick to do something evil. That's someone, if you would give someone advice, right? Let's say you go and meet this wife, or the first recipient, and you tell him, listen, you know what to do? If you don't want B to get it, sell it to someone else. And that way, now you get money, you get cash in your hands, and when you die, don't worry about it. That person can't take it because we followed Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. This is, while legally applicable and it works, nevertheless, this is using a legal loophole for evil, because now the giver wanted it to go to B, and now you're causing B to lose out on something that should be coming to him. So Abaye said this is an evil thing to do. So even though it works, it's valid, but it's evil. So would Abaye really say this? And the answer is yes. Mi kamar tinase niset kamar. Abaye didn't say that she should go and get married just so that she can keep the field and prevent B from getting it. He just said, if she got married, she's not allowed to get married just because someone gave her a field that will go to someone else. She loves the guy. She wants to get married. If that happens, then happens to be a consequence, an unfortunate consequence for B is that Ploni will not be able to get it because the husband gets it. But still, Abaye would say that you should not go to someone who is in such a situation and say, hey, you get cash for your field now, sell it, and then you can cheat out B. That would still be evil. All right, Ve'amar Abaye. Now, a second statement of Abaye, a similar but slightly different case. Nechasai lich v'acharayich liploni. In this case, someone says to a married woman. The Gemara is going to show in a second that this is talking about a married woman. While she's married, someone comes and says, "Here, I'm giving you this gift of this field, and you can use it as long as you're alive. Afterwards, it's going to go to Ploni." We'll call him B again. Umachra umeta, and she sells it while she's married. Sells it, and she dies. In that case, now it's the hands of the seller. Habal mosimi ad halakochot. The husband has a right to go to the buyer and say, "Hey, I want this back." Just like any case, a general rule is that anytime the woman has land while they're married, he doesn't own it, but he has a partnership in it. He has control over the land, and therefore he can come and say, "I never agreed to my wife selling that land, and so I'm repossessing it from the buyer." The husband has a right to do that. But B, right, the Ploni, he comes and says, "It's supposed to go to me after the wife has died. She has died. Now give it to me." So he has a right to collect it. But then the buyer comes back and says, "Wait, I bought it first." And the halacha is that if I bought it, then it doesn't go to Peloni, and so I'm going to take it back from you. In that case, while it looks like it could go round and round, we don't make it do so. Instead, the bottom line is we leave it in the hands of the buyer. So even though theoretically the husband has a right to take it, and then the Ploni has a right to take it from the husband, but the buyer can then come back and say, the wife had a full right to sell it to me, to the buyer, before you. I have prior right than you, Peloni, and take it back. And they could go round and round. We don't say that. So that's the question. How is this case different from our Mishnah, where they keep going around and around until they make a compromise? But here we just leave it in the hands of the buyer. In the case of the Mishnah, each of the three parties has a loss. The buyer gave money for it. The woman, this is her Ketubot payment. She's going to be out if she doesn't have it. The other wife, she'll be out of her Ketubot payment if she loses it. So everybody is incurring a loss, and it's all equal loss. So therefore, they all have an equal right to it. It keeps going round and round. But in this case, the original guy gifted it to the woman, and the only one that spent money on it is the buyer. He gave money for it. The other two is just going to be a secondary gift, a re-gift, if you will, right? It's going to go to Ploni as a second gift. Or the husband, he never paid for it. It just goes to him because he has a right like a buyer. And therefore, since the buyer is the only one that actually will incur a loss, although the other two have a legitimate claim to it, the buyer's claim is greater and he keeps it. Good. Azal Rafram Amal Lishma Takamed Rav Asher. Rafram said the second statement here of Abaye, or I guess third statement of Abaye, to Rav Asher. And he asked, Mi Amar Abaye Hachi? Wait, did Abaye say that? Remember the first statement he said? V'hamar Abaye, Nechasai lich v'acharayich leploni, amda v'niset, Baal lokeach haveh, v'en l'acharach b'mkom Baal kelum. Abaye back then said that if a man gifts something to a woman and says, "Here's for you while you're alive," and then it goes to Ploni, and she goes and gets married, then the husband keeps it, and B does not get it at all. Because that is like the first buyer, and therefore B would not be able to collect it from the husband. How come Abaye in this case over here said that Ploni can collect it from the husband? There seems to be a contradiction. The first statement of Abaye was when she was single. Because she was single and she enters the marriage, her entrance to the marriage is at that point the husband acquires the land, and so he is the first buyer, and therefore he can keep it. Ploni cannot take it. Hachad amar la kishehi nesuah, Maika amar la acharaich likne, ba'ala likne. But in the case, the last statement of Abaye is when the person giving the gift gives it to her when she's already married. So when he says, I'm giving it to you, when you die, it goes to Ploni, he meant really Ploni and not your husband. In other words, that's built into the condition because he knows that she's married. He's building into the condition. I want it to go. You can use it while you're alive, and after you die, I want it not to go to your husband. You are married. I know you have a husband. I'm putting that into the clause. No, not your husband, but rather to the other guy. That's why, and this in the last case, Peloni has a prior right over the husband. And so the husband has a right to collect it from the purchaser because the husband says, we're partners, but Peloni has a right to take it from the buyer. But for this reason, even though the purchaser can go back and say, yeah, but I'm the purchaser, and purchasers are before Ploni. All right, so these are fun paradoxes where A is greater than B and B is greater than C, but nevertheless, A is not greater than C, C is greater than A. And, two more paradoxes of the same type. The last line in the Mishnah says, V'chen ba'al chob, and just like we can create a case with a man and two wives, where they goes around in circles, so too we can create a case with a creditor. How so? Tana, V'chen ba'al chob u'shne lakochot. You have a borrower, he borrowed $100. The borrower also had two fields worth 50 each. And he sold those two fields, one to one guy and one to the second. And then the creditor, in the meantime, waives his right to collect the land from the second purchaser. Okay, so when it comes time to collect, he goes to the first buyer and repossesses the land. Okay, that's fine. But then the first buyer can go to the second buyer and say, hey, wait a second, I was here first, I bought first, and therefore I have a prior lien, so you give me the land that you bought. So he does. And now the second buyer is out, so the second buyer can go back to the creditor and say, give me that, you said you're not going to collect from me, and now look, you have the land, so give it back to me. So then the creditor has to give the land back to the second buyer, and you start the process all over again. The creditor goes to the first buyer once again. So here we have the same thing, and they're going to have to end it by compromising. And v'chen isha ba'ala chov u'shne lakochot, and the same thing would be a female creditor if she wanted to collect her ketubot. Instead of there being two wives, it could be the same thing with one wife, but the husband sold his land to two people, and she said to the second purchaser, I'm not going to collect from you. Same thing there, she'll collect from the first guy, but the first guy will then repossess from the second buyer. The second buyer will repossess from the wife, and so on forever. And I think this is a good lesson that in the end we have to compromise, because if we don't, then everybody will lose out. And so compromise is the best policy. Hadran alach mishaya nasui. Chazakim u'baruchim.